Hello and welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, hi, you're very welcome. This is Reading the Past and I'm Dr. Cat. So, fake news. It's a term that is virtually ubiquitous at the moment. You can barely look on social media or even turn on your TV without hearing it. And a few years ago in this country, we had the Leveson inquiry that looked into the way in which members of the press were apparently abusing their position. All of this has resulted in some people calling for greater controls over the press and the media, what they're able to do, say, and how they're able to act. On the reverse of this, of course, journalists say that the freedom of the press is vitally important to democracy. They make it appear like it was a hard fought for right. Now, while I under no circumstances think that freedom of the press is a bad thing, quite the opposite. I think it's something that should be preserved and protected and fought for. However, it's not quite true that it was hard fought for. So how exactly did the press get their freedom? Well, that's what I'm going to be looking at in today's video. Let's go. The period between 1780 and 1830 is viewed today as being the very pinnacle for satirical cartooning in Great Britain. Great masters like James Gillray and George Cruikshank were plying their trade at this time. And through them, these images were being produced. As you can see, they are lambasting monarchs and political figures and society doyens. It seems as if virtually no one is exempt from their scathing satire. And if we compare these sorts of images to those which could and would be produced 200 years previously, perhaps in the latter years of the reign of Elizabeth I, we see a marked contradiction. Elizabeth I is famous for many things. One of them was her iron grip on her own image, how it could be produced, presented and preserved. Every image of Elizabeth had to go through censorship, and if they were not censored, if somebody produced an image that had not been through this censorship process and that image proved offensive to the Queen, the punishment could be dire, as bad as body parts being taken from you. So in a 200-year period, we see a vast differentiation in what was allowable. Now the question is, what caused this shift to occur? Throughout history, monarchs and politicians have attempted to control publication of images and texts. The Tudor monarchs were no different from those who came before them or after them. But the particular timeline I'm concerned with starts in 1662. Let's have a look at it. In 1662, there was created an Act for preventing the frequent abuses in printing seditious, treasonable and unlicensed books and pamphlets, and for the regulating of printing and printing presses. The following year, in 1663, as a better Act, which had been expected, failed to materialise, this original Act was renewed. It was renewed again in 1665. In 1679, the renewal of this Act was overlooked in Parliament because of the chaos of the Popish plot, where Titus Oates created a fictionalised conspiracy that stated that Jesuits were seeking to assassinate Charles II. In the overlooking of this Act, the creation and publication of newsprint or news media was able to explode and grow exponentially. But not for long. In 1685, the Act was reinstated and the production of newspapers had to cease because it's simply too difficult, of course, to get a licence to print a daily or a weekly newspaper. By the time you've applied and got through the censorship, the news is already out of date. In 1693, the Act was renewed again, but with a caveat. Already people were growing concerned about the monopoly that was being held by the Stationers' Company. The stationers were the people who had the right to censor and also give licences to allow text to be published. In 1695, because of these concerns, and perhaps because of other reasons, the Act was allowed to lapse. A new and improved Act was demanded by the House of Lords. However, in 1697, this new Act failed to get through the Commons' vote, and The whole idea of press licensing was dropped. In its most basic interpretation, the lapsing of the Licensing Act in 1695 seems to be government's direct attempt to curtail and cease the monopoly of the Stationers' Company. What this then meant was that it was no longer a pay-to-play system for licensing and publication. In doing so, it completely ended the traditional system of copyright and exploded the number of people who could be publishable. The byproduct of this also was that daily or weekly newspapers could work. When you no longer have to seek out a license and have your work censored, you can write for a newspaper in the morning or in an evening and have it printed that afternoon or the next day. While this lapse of the Licensing Act is seen by many today as the start of the freedom of the press, I think that's rather putting the cart before the horse, because what this actually is, it's a moment where the press is allowed to exist. It's not about its freedom, it's about its very existence. One thing that's very interesting to me is that later commentators are universally surprised about how little attention the lapse of the Licensing Act garners among contemporaries. For these later commentators, this is a crucial sea change moment, and they are shocked and astounded that the people of the time don't seem to recognise it. And this makes me wonder, what is going on for us now? What event is taking place that our descendants 100, 200, 300 plus years from now might look back on as being the crucial moment in the development and shaping of history? Do we even recognise it for what it is? Would we even be capable of doing so? What do you think might be the sea change moment for us? Do let me know in the comments section down below. What is clear to me is that the lapse of the Licensing Act doesn't occur because people are clamouring or protesting or fighting even for the democracy that is supported by a free press. In fact, what this is a government acting against the monopoly held by the Stationers' Company, where the side effect is the creation of a press that could be free. The forcing of the lapse of the Licensing Act by the House of Commons was broadly seen as being a Whig accomplishment. The Whig Party is the party that Sarah Churchill seems to have had the most affinity for. Sarah Churchill, Duchess of Marlborough, she who is one of the figures focused on in the favourite film, which my husband and I reviewed, and I'm going to leave a link to that review video up here. The lapse in the Licensing Act happens just before Queen Anne, who's also, of course, in the favourite, comes to the throne. At this time, there's a two-party system, the Whigs and the Tories. Now, just what their policies were and how they differed is murky. There's a lot of overlap and interchange, and as with so many things, it's incredibly complex. To massively simplify, the Whigs are, broadly speaking, the party for change. They are seeking to engage with political and religious reform. Therefore, it makes absolute sense that this is the party that is attempting to push through and change these licensing terms, and also to disrupt the monopoly held by the powerhouse that was the Stationers' Company. However, just because this is seen as a Whig victory, it doesn't mean that everybody who was tied to the Whig Party agreed with it. I suppose then, as much as now, people who share party ties don't always share policy ideals. One person who was tied to the Whig Party, Jonathan Swift, was vociferous in his condemnation of the lapse in the Licensing Act. Between 1696 and 97, Jonathan Swift wrote two texts, which were both published in 1704, A Tale of a Tub and The Battle of the Books, both of which utterly condemned the lapse and the free press that it created. Similarly, in the mid-19th century, another Whig politician, Thomas Babington Macaulay, essentially sought to absolve his party of any blame for this. He says the following: "They knew not what they were doing, what a revolution they were making, what a power they were calling into existence." It seems that Macaulay is claiming that the lapse in the Licensing Act and the freedom of the press that came out of it is not a good thing. He isn't proud of his party's legacy in this. Instead, he seems to be attempting to absolve them of blame by pleading their ignorance. However, this claim by Macaulay of the ignorance of his party in the past is wholly disputed by Randy Robertson. He sees that the Commons' decision to allow the Licensing Act to lapse, in fact, to fight for it, was a deliberate plan, a parliamentary stratagem to wrest power from the Crown, By pretending that the 1662 Act was idle, the House was able to divest the king and the stationers of their control over printing, or at least strip them of the power of prior restraint. Prior restraint is pre-publication censorship. Now, we still have censorship today. Films have an age restriction on them, as do video games. And books and films and things like that will occasionally be censored after publication. Something will be in them that is found to be illegal or morally repugnant in some way, and the attempt will be made to remove it from view. However, this doesn't have the same power and capacity that censoring it before publication would have. Once it's been published, the genie, so to speak, is out of the bottle, and it's much harder to put it back in. While a text may become banned, or a film for that matter, if it has been published, it's out there. And once it's out there, for those so minded, it's accessible. It can never be so completely removed as it could have been if it had been censored pre-publication. So what this means is that if a text or a film or a music album, for example, is found to have seditious or treasonous or libelous content, it may not be saleable after a certain point because it's been censored, but if it has been published, it can still be accessible. That sedition, that treason, that libel can therefore still spread, whereas prior restraint or pre-publication censorship prevents such a thing from ever having occurred. I'd love to know what you think of this topic. If you have any questions, comments or concerns, do leave them in the comment section down below. I'm also going to leave my social media links in the description box so you can come and find me over there, follow me and continue the conversation. I hope you've enjoyed this video and found it interesting. If you did, please let me know by clicking the like button. Please also subscribe to my channel and click the bell icon so that YouTube tells you when I've next uploaded. I hope you're going to have a great day, whatever you're doing, and I look forward to speaking to you all in my next video. Take care of yourselves. Bye-bye for now.